Review copy provided by Grasshopper Manufacture. Romeo is a Dead Man is the newest game from Grasshopper Manufacture and Suda 51, with their last release being the third main entry in the beloved No More Heroes series back in 2021. As a fan of Suda 51 and his team, I was very excited to see a completely original title as their next project, something we haven't seen from them in a very long time. But does Romeo is a Dead Man deliver on the Suda 51 experience, or does it fall short and sit in the shadows of his other titles? Let's find out together. Suda 51 has a very distinct style, where if you're not along for the ride, you just don't get on. And that couldn't be stated more clearly with Romeo is a Dead Man. Romeo Stargazer is a small town deputy who falls in love with a girl named Juliet, go figure, but gets mauled and killed at the start of the game by a monster. But mere moments after that happens, Romeo's scientist grandpa uses a time machine to arrive at the right moment and use a device to save him and turn him into an undead superhero now named Dead Man. And apparently, it turns out that Romeo's new love interest is an evil multiversal villain threatening the collapse of the space-time continuum. So Romeo with his new Deadman powers is recruited by the FBI's space-time police to take out these variants of Juliet and save all of existence. Oh, and Romeo's grandfather is also killed, but he's now living as a patch on Romeo's jacket for some reason. Now I'm sure you're thinking that everything I just told you felt very overwhelming. And that's completely intentional, because this flood of plot points is given to us in the first 10 minutes of the game. And yes, I counted. This is without question Suda's craziest scenario yet, and Romeo is a Dead Man continues to throw ever increasingly bizarre things at you as you progress across space-time. But it does establish its formula fairly early on in a way that is very refreshing in this era of modern gaming. The game is laid out in an episodic way, with each episode having you travel to different eras of time to take down a space-time villain. There's even an opening panel that starts each new section of the game, and a small credits sequence that plays after you've reached the end of the episode. And I think this works really well in two different camps. You can either play through multiple episodes at a time in long binge sessions, or you can stop at natural breakpoints if you need to step back and take in all the craziness that you just experienced. This feels very similar to the formula of the No More Heroes games, where you go on a mission as Romeo and hack away at a bunch of enemies in over-the-top action spectacle combat, then take a break playing various minigames that directly relate to upgrading your character, which we'll talk about later. And can I just say, I really miss this style of game progression, and the way the game is set up as a sort of multiverse, timeline exploration adventure gives them an excuse to make each area feel super unique. From a shopping mall that gives off Dead Rising vibes, to an insane asylum akin to your average horror game experience. And exploring these areas rewards you with finding collectibles and items that you can use to cook up curry dishes at your base, improve Romeo's weapons and stats, and much more. The other important piece of level design comes from entering the subspace, which can be accessed by entering one of the many televisions that are scattered throughout the level. The subspace acts as a limbo where Romeo travels around the area to find keys and unlock the Callista Gate to finish the level. This acts as a nice way to break up the combat encounters with a maze of platforming for you to figure out and open up the rest of the area in the real world. However, there were many times where I got lost due to getting sidetracked looking for items, and while you'll occasionally get a nice lady that points you in the right direction, the areas in the subspace look exactly the same. So it's a bit challenging to figure out where you are or where you just came from. And as that kept happening, it started slowing the pace down a bit for me, and I wanted to go back to hitting things. Now, while we're on the topic of hitting things, let's talk about the combat. It focuses on combos and dodging enemy attacks with tons of visual flair and blood spraying effects. It's relatively straightforward with no real combat depth, but it serves its purpose and was still fun to engage with, even if the camera was a bit wonky from time to time. Romeo has 4 different melee and ranged weapons that can be unlocked at any time, and you can switch between them in real time during combat. As you attack, you collect blood from enemies, and once the gauge is full, we'll let Romeo use a super attack called Bloody Summer. These Bloody Summer attacks will vary depending on the melee or ranged weapon you have equipped, and can quickly turn any bad situation around. I enjoyed each of the weapons, but found myself favoring the Star Destroyer for its massive attack damage, and the Yggdrasil for its Bloody Summer attack that will nuke bosses when it's fully upgraded. However, I did find myself switching to the Arcadia for its crowd control, when I got overwhelmed by a horde of zombies. I think it's also worth noting that I found myself favoring the melee weapons more than the guns, mainly because I'm an unga bunga sword swinging kind of guy, but I also found them to be more effective, and switching back and forth between melee and gunplay wasn't as smooth as I'd hoped it'd be. The enemy variety is also fairly decent, with basic goons that can have different status elements. A good amount of them show up with guns that can be especially annoying when dealing with large crowds. And we also have various mutations with special properties like scorpion-looking enemies that drop bombs, large giants that have large swings and shockwaves, and this piece of shit. I would also like to briefly mention that there were a few encounters that had massive frame drops with exceptionally large hordes, which I'm hoping gets fixed in a patch down the line, as those instances pop up on more than a few occasions. The bosses in this game ramps the combat up to 11, and were quite a challenge with the kit you're given. However, they are without question the least interesting part of the game, with the second boss at the mall being the only one I can recall from memory with any sort of intrigue, and that's solely due to the setting of having 2 floors to fight them on. While the general combat is fun to play, it doesn't do much to stand out on its own until you start using the unique and definitely weirdest feature of the game, which are the bastards. Zombies that you can grow like plants and equip to use in battle. You have attack, strategy, and support zombies that each have their own rarities and special abilities, like one that acts as a sentry and shoots projectiles, or another that freezes enemies and bosses so Romeo can wail on them. I wasn't sure at first how often I'd be using them in combat, but I found that this is another valuable tool that can be used for dealing with large crowds of zombies, and really caters to player expression with the amount of customization you have. This can also be said for the various badges that can be equipped, as well as how you decide to level up your stats in the Dead Gear Cannonball minigame, which can be reset at any time if you want to change up your stats. Speaking of minigames, one of the things that I really like about Suda's games is how there are so many examples of different minigames that can be played inside the main game. The Cannonball game is the one I just mentioned, but we also have a curry cooking game, a dating simulator that I still haven't quite got to the end of just yet, and the planting and harvesting of your bastards, which is oddly satisfying. You can even set up cage matches with your bastards, and the one that comes out on top gets an upgrade. There's also optional items that you can use in the middle of combat, either to negate status effects or give yourself a buff, but I went through the entire game without using them a single time. I'm just the type of guy that doesn't like using items, even though I probably could have used them from time to time to give myself a small advantage, because the game is surprisingly challenging even on the normal difficulty, but I just didn't want to use them, and I even went out of my way to sell them so I could use that currency for something I actually wanted in the shop that would improve the combat experience without having to rely on items. But the option is there for those that want to take advantage of it. Now let's move on to what was my personal favorite thing about this game, and that's the story and the presentation. Now, Romeo isn't the strongest protagonist, but he definitely stands out as a fish out of water in this insane world he's been dragged into. He's played more on the straight side, while everything going on around him is insanely wacky. He's no Travis Touchdown, but that's admittedly a pretty high bar to reach. But the dialogue is super quirky, and the side characters are so fun to talk to, with plenty of in-jokes and humorous banter. My favorite instance of this was a character that'll almost always make the mistake of saying Romeo instead of Dead Man, and will always correct himself, but never make any attempt to say the correct name. It's the type of dialogue that would be really funny to read in a visual novel, but not heard out loud. And Suda's games are one of the rare instances where I'm glad only a select amount of dialogue is actually spoken out loud with voice acting. The rest of it reminded me a lot of the exchanges in Travis Strikes Again, with an esoteric style that is very philosophical and really emphasizes the bizarreness of the whole thing. And finally, the presentation of this game is absolutely insane. There's so many different art styles that are used here, and the story is told through a collage of mixed media that really keeps you engaged throughout the whole thing. And even with all the bizarre things going on, it's relatively straightforward, and that combination is quite honestly what makes this game super memorable for me. That and the kick-ass soundtrack, with Romeo's battle theme being especially catchy and being stuck in my head since I started playing. It's definitely up there with the iconic No More Heroes theme as one of Suda's iconic bangers. Romeo as a Dead Man is a complete fever dream in the best way possible, and I had an absolute blast with it. It's very clear that Suda and his team wanted to make Romeo is a Dead Man in a way that elevates the Grasshopper action game standard, and I think they did that marvelously. No More Heroes is the closest Suda game it can be compared to, but I also think it's the perfect culmination of everything these guys have made. While it certainly isn't the most polished action game, the simple push and pull style of combat is still very fun to play, and the insane amount of particle and blood effects riddling the screen are clearly the priority in that department. But where I think the game truly shines is in the presentation of this crazy world. And that alone is what I think makes this space time traveling love story worth playing. I'm gonna give Romeo as a Dead Man a B+. But let me know what you think about Romeo as a Dead Man down in the comments, and let me know which Suda51 game is currently your favorite. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you want to see more content like this from me, you can subscribe and follow me on all of my other social media platforms, all of which house similar content that I have here on this channel. And I'd like to once again thank all of my Grave Gang YouTube members listed here on screen. If you want to be featured on my next video, plus a bunch of other rewards, become a YouTube member today. And if you want to watch another video of mine, you can check it out over on this side of the screen over here. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.